Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Now, today I am joined by the amazing Cameron Gallagher. Cameron, how you doing today, man?
Very good. I'm very glad to be here too. I appreciate you having me.
Oh man, this is such an honor for me. But before we talk about why you're here, Cam, I would like for the people that don't know you to get to know you a little bit.
Yeah,
Cameron
of
is a
course.
director, writer, and producer in New York. Growing up a VHS kid, which I love. I don't know if you know this about me or not, but my parents owned a mom and pop video store called Downtown Video growing up.
Oh, I
So,
love
um,
that.
yeah, so and I know what it's like to have no blank tapes, so having to put a piece of tape over the VHS so you could record over it to make your home videos. I know you did that too, making a lot of home videos from the ages of 5 to 16. Then you really started to take your craft seriously, getting into the horror genre. And some of your films include on Crypt TV's The Alive and the Forgotten,
Yeah.
and the Screamfest official selection, The Rickety Man, which premiered at the TLC Chinese Theater in LA in 2021. So, we talk about being a young boy and making tapes in your living room and in your house, making your own horror short films and comedies and things like that. Then going to like The Alive and the Forgotten. What did it feel like for you to finally, become part of like Crypt TV, something super iconic in the horror world?
Yeah. Honestly, it was kind of surprising and a little crazy. Like, I feel like it's one of those things where you end up there and you don't really know how you got there. I think a lot of times, and I think that was definitely kind of that scenario. I had actually been in talks with Crypt TV for a little while about the possibility of doing. They were doing like these like 15-second like horror things, kind of like pre Instagram Reels, all that kind of stuff. So it was definitely ahead of its time. And I'd kind of been in talks with them and that sort of fell through. And I just like randomly sent them the Forgotten. And I was like, hey, I don't know if it's something you guys would be interested in, but maybe this would kind of replace that 15-second. And yeah, so it was really cool to like see it get on Crypt TV, to see it play out. And I think still to this day, I believe the Forgotten is still the highest viewed video we've ever gotten. I think like between Facebook and YouTube, it was like well over 1 million views, which was kind of crazy. But at the same
Right.
time, it was sort of that thing where you do that and then you're like, okay, well, it's still time to go on to the next and do the next thing. And right, it just kind of feels like that progression of, okay, well, let's do it bigger, let's do it better. And then Be Alive was kind of a similar thing, or we had made the short film and actually put it on YouTube for a little bit first. And I was like, you know what, let me reach out to Crypt TV and see if they're interested into it. And they were. And same thing. It was just kind of cool to see them take it, see the audience. And it's always fun, like reading the comments and seeing people's like theories behind things and what they think might be, you know, whether it's like the idea or the
Right.
creature or what it's about, right? Or what could be like a sequel, that kind of stuff. So it's definitely cool and it's just wild. And I think sometimes myself and Zach, who's my producing partner and works with me, we always talk about having to like look back and say, like the person 3 years ago, what would they think of us now, right? That sort of thing. Because I
Right.
think sometimes you do feel like you're boiling the frog, right? Like when they say like when you boil a frog, right? Like it doesn't even know it's boiling until it's there.
Right.
And I think that's a lot of times how it is, where you don't really realize what you're doing and how it is until you look back and it's crazy. So it was definitely surreal and it's really fun and it's definitely one of those like cool things to be able to tell people, especially now that Crypt TV is kind of shifted their focus a little bit too. So it's kind of like it lived in this pocket of time that doesn't exist anymore. So it's kind
Right.
of fun to be able to be a part of that and say that we got to do that.
That's awesome, man. And like I said, you're doing all these amazing things, and then you do something
Thank you.
like the Rickety Man. What was that like for you to premiere that out there?
Yeah, that was crazy. I mean, the whole Rickety Man experience in general was kind of wild. I was kind of, we had made a short film and, COVID had happened. So we were kind of like down on what we could create. And I didn't really know what the next possible step was. And I saw this, a friend of mine who's actually a judge in the Killer Shorts competition. And I kind of thought that it was a short film competition. So I
Yeah.
went to the website and I was like, oh, this is a screenwriting competition. And I'm like, I don't want anything to do with this. But then I kind of realized like a day later, I was like, oh, I should reach out to some of these writers and read these scripts, like just out of pure interest and just to see what's out there. And
Sure.
I ended up reading The Rickety Man from Jeremiah Lewis. And it blew me away. Like I thought the period was just so well done and everything about it was just really interesting and kind of intrigued me. And it definitely felt like it kind of sat nicely with the style of horror that I like to do. So I reached out to him and I was like, hey, I really liked the story. I just wanted to talk to you. And we kind of ended up in this awesome spot where we started this collaboration. And suddenly, kind of like the whole scenario, we were like, oh, we're in pre-production and we're doing this. And we quickly realized that we were going to need a lot of money to do a period piece with, a child actor. And like, it's kind of like what everyone tells you not to do as a director, like don't work with kids, don't do period. And
Right.
we of course did both of those. And so we were like, oh, we'll launch a Kickstarter. And we'd had a couple friends that have had some successful Kickstarters. So we talked with them. And all of a sudden we threw this Kickstarter up and, it took a lot of time and effort, but we didn't really know what was going to happen. And we ended up raising over $16,000, which was crazy and not expected, to be honest. And
Right.
we took that, and making the film was pretty wild because it was sort of the largest production that we had ever been on, the largest production we'd ever done. Everything until then was usually me and like one other person, or me and Zach and like two actors or something, very, very small. And this was having a full crew, and, people have their specialized jobs, and we do commercial video work. So that kind of stuff is pretty normal in the commercial world. And obviously it is in the film world as well. But at that scale that we were doing it at, it was kind of all new. And it was awesome because I felt like it was a real jumpstart into taking things a little more seriously and really trying to expand and go bigger, and then start pitching some of these films as feature films. Because I'd actually learned that originally on The Forgotten. I had a manager reach out and kind of ask me what would the feature film version of The Forgotten look like, so that I knew that was there. And then we started doing it with the Rickety Man, and then we've done that kind of with all of our films so far. But unfortunately, we actually had to miss the premiere in LA, which was such a bummer. We were grinding we used to do weddings as well, and we were on the wedding grind. And unfortunately, we had 3 weddings that week, so we couldn't make the trip, which was an absolute bummer. But some of our crew members that did our post audio, they have like a post house out in LA, and they got to go there and they took pictures and stuff, and it was really cool to see. And it was kind of wild to think like, oh, our film's playing at the same movie theater that like Star Wars premiered at, and like
Right.
it was kind of wild to even fathom, really.
Well, I mean, you're a part of history now,
Right.
and that's something that, it may seem silly to other people, but to be in that position where you can say now that you've done this, your film is premiered here, where all these major films have premiered, and to be a part of such a legacy, that's an amazing thing. And that's something you should never sell yourself short on, because who knows if, anybody else could ever have that type of opportunity, so it's something that you should definitely cherish and hold close to yourself. And we know that you've done these amazing things, but do you have anything coming up in the future you can tell us a little bit about? I know NDAs exist and it's kind of hard to talk about some things, but do you have anything coming up that you can tell us about?
Yeah, definitely. So we pretty much the biggest project we're working on right now. Of course, we have a bunch of features we're pitching, and actually one of them is kind of moving with some traction. And that one I can't talk about just yet, but I'm excited because that may have some potential. But it is a short film that you've seen, so if people can go back and check it out, they'll know. Right. But we are working on another short film called Frigid that we're actually launching a Kickstarter for May 17th, and we're really excited because Frigid's a really fun, like really creepy, cool story. We've kind of called it like a fusing of like the A24, a little more like dramatic, slow burn horror mixed with that kind of Blumhouse, like really punchy popcorn horror. So we think we found a really cool middle ground, and it's basically about a hospice nurse who visits this man who's dying, and he basically claims that this entity needs the cold, and that it's going to steal his soul. And it's kind of this really like ticking clock tension, the temperature's dropping the whole film. So we're really excited. We're launching the Kickstarter. We're hoping to be shooting in September. So that's like the next big project on the docket. We do have another small short film called Catch that we did coming out very soon. That was kind of like I'll call it more of like an experimental film. Like sometimes we like to do like experimental practice films where we kind of challenge ourselves with a new idea and say, okay, what can we do in one day? What can we accomplish with like no budget? Like in this case, it was literally no money. It was just basically the crew and people we could pull together. So we kind of do those as practice. And so Catch is going to be coming out as well. But those are like the 2 major projects. But there's definitely some cool things in the works that we're very excited about. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to talk more about that soon.
Yeah, well, and the best way for you guys to keep up with that is to follow Cam on all his social media links. All those links are down in the description. So make sure you're following him so you can stay up to date on everything that he has coming up, so you can help with the Kickstarter. I have that link down in the description as well, if it is still active at this time. If not, they may be doing a second bout. So if you follow him on social media, you'll be able to stay up on that. So we know what you're doing now and what you're doing in the future. But in order for you to make horror shorts and be a part of the horror genre, horror had to start for you somewhere. So now, Cam, I would like to go back to the past and talk about what got you started in the horror genre, your first horror movie. And Cameron, the first horror movie that you watched was
Friday the 13th.
And we are talking 1980, the OG, correct?
Yes, the OG. Yes.
Hell yeah. I love this film. I absolutely adore this film. Do you remember about how old you were the first time you had seen it?
So I was absolutely way too young. And I think I joke like it's probably one of the first memories I have. Like I probably was like 3 or 4 years old. And It wasn't something that I like sat down and watched. I just remember seeing it on the TV and it being like baked in my brain from that point on. And I think, I feel like there's always that kind of idea that when you see something that's so terrifying and it's kind of maybe taboo, right? I think there's that attraction to it and that excitement about it. And I think that's probably, where it started, although I guess I can't calculate it. But yeah, that OG Friday the 13th it's something else. I think a lot of people don't give it enough credit for actually being as like a mystery thriller as it is. I think people think like, oh, Friday the 13th, you immediately think of like every sequel. And I think people kind of lose like how like Italian Giallo inspired that first movie is.
Oh, yeah.
And like, even like by Black Christmas and that kind of stuff. And I feel like it kind of gets lost in the sequels to come, which I do love, but it's just that kind of maybe mentality.
Right. And we know that you were very, very young when you watched it. And like you said, this is a movie that really sticks with you when you were at a young age watching it for the first time. But do you remember who was there the first time you were watching it with you?
It was definitely my dad. My dad was the horror movie fan, so he must have had it playing. And like I said, whether I was just like there and happened to be there, or I happened to walk in, or whatever it may be, it is just baked in my brain. And he's always been a horror fan too. So kind of even all throughout growing up, there was a lot of that just on the TV. Right, pretty much anytime we were at the house, he was watching some type of either like horror movie or some like old army movie or something.
Right. Well, no, and it's funny because, these are memories that you have with your parents that you're never going to lose. You're going to have for the rest of your life. And, I don't remember my first comedy. I don't remember my first action, but I remember my first horror movie. And I remember which scene stuck with me the most. But we're not here to talk about me, Cam. We're here to talk about you. Do you remember which scene it was from Friday the 13th that stuck with you the most?
Absolutely. So it was that moment where Kevin Bacon is laying down and the arrow goes through his neck. I will never forget that imagery. And I know back then it definitely scared me, and it still somewhat scares me. And I think to this day, like I have a fear of like veins and neck, just because the idea that like you would be just laying there or sitting there or whatever, and that something would be completely behind you, right, unbeknownst to you, and would just take you out. And it just like makes me like lift my shoulders up and kind of cringe a little bit. But yeah, no, I just vividly remember that scene and how like creepy it was and gross it was. And it's kind of, and I think it's a good mixture of like all of those things, right? The scene is so suspenseful, it's creepy, it's gross. So it's kind of like that perfect mixing pot of all the elements of horror, I think, working well together and being the ultimate effective.
Right. And it's one of the most iconic kills in the history of cinema. It's one of the kills, one of those happy accidents of the blood not working and them having to really push the tube to get in the spritzing. And it's one of those things that, really sticks with you, especially when you first see it, you're scared because you see an arrow go through a guy's neck, but then the older you get, you're like, that's fucking Kevin Bacon, man.
Right. Like, I was going to say that was, I think, the other thing too. Like, I think maybe subconsciously I recognized Kevin Bacon. Right. Like as a kid, like maybe I had seen him in other things. So I think there was maybe that too, like that familiarity of, I know this guy, like I recognize him. And now I'm seeing this horrific scene of him dying. Like I definitely think it 100% added to it.
Oh, for sure. And that's how I felt. Watching, obviously it was Kevin Bacon's first film. So when people are first watching it, they're like, oh, this stoner just got killed. But, as we're
Right.
recognizing him, we know what's
Yeah,
really
yeah.
going on with that. So Friday the 13th is a major franchise now. It's run the gamut on all the different movies that they have. But would you say which one of the films is your favorite in the whole franchise?
Oh man. I mean, I think it'd be easy to just say the original. So I think it probably is. But I would say if I had to like give a follow up to that, um, oh boy, I really think that the Friday 13th Part Two and
Mhm.
Part Four are probably the two strongest like sequels when it comes to I think being a good film and being effective and entertaining. I find like Jason Goes to Hell really fun, and it's like I think it's not a great movie, but I think it's fun. I think there are a lot of them that are like interesting and have their own piece, but I think two is actually a really creepy slasher movie. Um, and again, I think those first two kind of get grouped into what might people might be thinking of like seven and eight, right? Manhattan and Jason X or that kind of stuff. So I would say the sequel is really really strong and really really scary. I think four is fun, but yeah, I would say other than the original, I think I'd have to give it to part two because it's just I don't know. It's like again, I think it's. I've said this kind of about like Stranger Things. Like I really like Stranger Things, and I think one thing that I find interesting is the first like two seasons were referencing old horror movies, right? And kind
Yeah,
of the '80s culture, and then season three and four, which I still love, but I think they start to reference themselves. And I think
sure.
that's kind of where Friday the 13th started. Is the first two were like referencing other horror movies, right? That first one's like a very giallo horror film, right? Like that mystery thriller who done it, and the sequel is very much like that early slasher film. And then I think the rest of them start to kind of emulate themselves. They're like, oh,
Sure.
now we are the formula. So
Right.
yeah, those first two are just like unbeatable.
I do got to say, I am a huge Jason Goes to Hell defender.
Oh,
Um,
okay, great. I love it.
Dude, I absolutely love that film. I think, they took a big swing with Manhattan. They missed. It wasn't the greatest film. But with Jason Goes to Hell, we've seen the same thing 7 times. At least 8 tried to take it somewhere else and do something different. And then Jason Goes to Hell comes and it's like, let's just go off the fucking rails here, man. Let's just go
Yeah.
crazy with it. And I love it. If you watch 1 through 7, and then you watch 8 and 9, you're like, man, that is a refreshing. 8 may not be the best film in the world, but at least it's not like, hey, we're back at a camp with a bunch of counselors. They're not doing the same thing over again. They really tried to
You're
reinvent the
right.
wheel in its own franchise. So Goes to Hell, especially, is one that I will defend to the death. It's my second favorite in the
Yeah.
franchise
Oh, I
behind
love
Part
that.
Six.
Oh,
Part
oh,
Six will
part
always
six
be
is
my
great
favorite.
too.
I love Frank and Jason. I love CJ Graham's portrayal of Jason, but it goes that and then Goes to Hell. Those are the two that just rock me every single time. So,
Well, it's so cool. I
um,
think that a franchise can have that many variation too, where it's like, yeah, like you can have these different favorites and they're almost like their own subgenre. Like I think six is like really funny and it's very aware of itself. And I love that about it. And I think like what I loved about Jason Goes to Hell, it's the only one, at least in my eyes, that feels like a 90s TV movie. Like,
mhm.
and I mean that in like the best way. Like it feels like the best 90s TV movie. Like I love the slasher movie Cherry Falls,
Yeah,
and I thought it was like that like era of that like 90s TV movie feel. I think is so cool, and I thought that's what stood out about Jason Goes to Hell is it's like, oh, this is really different, and it feels very different. Like the rest of them feel like they're paying the 80s, right? Like they owe everything to the 80s, where other than kind of those first two, where I feel like that is the first one to kind of jump into that next world of okay, now we're in a different era, literally.
right. And it's amazing because, like I said, you've gone through all these different changes, all these different films. And then in 2009, we get the remake, the Friday the
Yeah.
13th remake, which essentially is a remake of part 1, 2, and 3 all mixed together. And um, would you now? I always say, would you like to see your first horror movie remade? Obviously, they had a Friday the 13th remake in 2009. But what I'm saying is because remakes are equal sequels, that's kind of all the rage in Hollywood right now. Would you like to see the OG Friday the 13th, Jason list, with Pamela Voorhees remade today?
I do actually. And funny enough, so actually the first R-rated horror movie I ever saw in theaters was the Friday the 13th reboot. So it's kind of this weird, like, it's always just been there. No, I actually would because my kind of take, and actually I'm really curious about this new A24 led series that they're going to be
Yeah.
making. Like I'm super interested in how that's going to go because I like what A24 does. Not all the time. I think some of them are misses, but I think they definitely are not afraid to swing for stuff. And I think a lot of people that make those movies are horror fans, which I also appreciate too. Like you listen to them talk and they really know their films. So I would like to see a remake of that original, really because I think like I think we've lost kind of those like slasher who done it, like Black
Yeah.
Christmas, an amazing movie. Like I love all those Italian giallo movies. Like I literally love all of them, all the Argento stuff, and so those are so cool to me. And that's what I think I love about Friday the 13th is it feels like the most American version of that.
Yeah.
Where it's like it's taking the camp, right, and these like super American, this American iconography, and it's getting that Italian giallo feel and bringing it to it. And I feel like it'd be really cool to see someone try to do that in the modern era. Like I think it would be cool to, and maybe if it's a remake, whether it's in the 80s or maybe it's even the 70s, right, or whatever it may be, I think it would be interesting to go and kind of see where that is. I'm I'm not opposed to remakes. I know like some people hate them because they're like, oh no, like it ruins the original. And sure, like I think my gripe with some of it is that the fact that they're giving a lot of money to make these remakes, which I think is sometimes unfortunate because then you're missing out on other films. But I think what's cool is that sometimes they do something wild and crazy and it's awesome. And
Hmm.
sometimes it sucks. And then at least I think you know what works and what doesn't. Or sometimes you're way ahead of the game. Like I think a prime example is like Scream 4. I think Scream 4 is a decent movie. I think it was kind of ahead of its time. And I think that's what hurt it. So I'd be curious if Friday the 13th were to come out, and again, kind of like this series, because it sounds like it's almost like more of a remake, prequel-ish kind of thing,
Right.
at least if my memory is correct. Um, so yeah, I'm down. I say let's go for it and let's see where it goes.
Well, it's funny because people that are watching that know me know what I'm about to say because I've been saying it for about 15 fucking years now. But I would really like to see a remake of the OG Friday the 13th with Kathy Bates playing Mrs.
Oh,
Voorhees.
oh, sold.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I think she's just so off her rocker. She's so unhinged, but she's also super sweet. Like, it's like literally the perfect mix of Misery and the Water Boy's mom. You know what I mean? Like, you mix those two
Right.
together, and that's Pamela Voorhees, man. So,
Yeah. And
um,
I think that's another thing too, is like I think there's sometimes like the idea that like Friday the 13th isn't like a prestigious movie. And it's like, yeah, maybe it like at the time it wasn't considered that. But that's where I think that maybe something like a remake can do interesting and do well is bring those prestige people like Kathy Bates is like, she's an incredible actress. And I think bringing some of those incredibly talented people to the front of these films is great, right? Like sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think, yeah, like that would be awesome. I would kill to
yeah.
see that.
Yeah, dude, it would just be absolutely, or another person. My wife is a very huge fan of Tony Collette, and she talked
Oh,
about,
shit,
seeing Tony
incredible.
Collette, do something like that. I think that would be super awesome too. So, we know how horror started for you, Cam, and, Friday the 13th, such an iconic horror movie, which is also referenced in the movie Scream. And while we're talking about Scream, my little buddy Ghostface is here, Cam, and he has a question for you. What's your favorite scary movie, Cameron? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
Yeah, so I have to, and this is weird, and it's probably a little bit of a hot take sometimes. I have to give it to the movie Insidious, and
Mhm.
I think it's a lot of reasons why this movie is my favorite. It kind of came at a pretty interesting time for me. So I'm 27, so I was, I believe, 14 or 15 when that movie came out, somewhere in around there. And I don't remember exactly what year it released. And I remember a friend of mine had the DVD in their car, and I saw it and I was like, and I was kind of like getting interested. I'd already been doing a little bit of filmmaking for a while, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do in filmmaking. And I remember watching them. I asked my friend about it. And he's like, "Oh, it's like the scary movie." And I was like, "Oh, cool! Like I never heard of this." And again, my dad was always watching these scary movies. So for me not to hear of one was kind of like,
Sure.
you're right. Like I should definitely get a hold of this. And after watching it, it was the first moment where I could see the director directing horror. I thought it was really scary. I thought it was really weird and like fun and wild. Like I had a really fun time, yet the story was like really depressing. And I thought that was such an interesting balance where it's like, man, this is a real serious problem going on with a serious family, and like it's very, a down film, right? It's not like a happy film. Yet the elements of it felt like fun and like a roller coaster, and it was the most like fun house, haunted house feeling I had had from the movie. And again, kind of seeing that directing, I realized I wanted to be a horror director, and I wanted to do what that film did. I wanted to, James Wan is so amazing at like pushing you down a hallway and like forcing you to go there. And, he hides things behind the cracks of doors and right in the corner of your eyes. And I thought like there's such this interesting, like weird manipulation, right, as a director. And I thought it's so fascinating because it's like you're grabbing the head of the audience and you're saying like, watch what I'm going to show you, right?
Yeah.
And there's something so like weird about that. And so that movie was just like I think it hit me at the perfect time, and it was like the perfect type of movie. And it's funny because a lot of times I'll make like, we'll come up with scenes in the film, or like, we'll work on, between Jeremiah and Zach and myself, and we're kind of coming up with these ideas, and I'll sort of like pitch an idea, and I'm like, oh, we should try this thing, or we should do this for the scary, set piece. And I realized that like deep embedded in my brain, it's like they're all from Insidious somewhere, or like they're inspired by it somewhere. And I'm like, oh, that was like the shot in Insidious. And it's like, it's just like embedded in here. So I absolutely love it. And it's just one of those movies that I could just rewatch 1,000 times.
And Insidious has the best jump scare of any movie ever. And the
Absolutely.
reason why that jump scare works so well is I love the way that Tom Savini says it. He calls it a magician jump scare. Because right before this, we have the monster pointing at Dalton, and the mom says, "What do you want?" It's Dalton. And so you're looking at the left hand right now. That's what you're scared of, is this right here. All your focus is here. And you have no idea that all the magic is really happening over here. And It's about to hit you. Like it's totally distracting you with that first scare. So you think that's your scare. You've made it out. Oh my God, I saw the demon. It was pointing at Dalton. And then boom, it's right there in front of your face.
Yeah.
And I love how Tom Savini did that in his remake of Night of the Living Dead. In the OG Night of the Living Dead, you have the zombie walking up to them in the graveyard and killing Johnny. But in the remake, you have the guy come up to him at first, and it's the guy's like, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." And you thought that was, because in the original, that's the zombie. And then the zombie grabs Johnny right after that. And that's what I feel like Insidious did. It mastered that. Look what we're doing here. Not what we're about to spring on you from over here. So
yeah, absolutely. No, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think that's what's like so magic about filmmaking is I think that it is a magic trick, right? And you're pushing, you're making the audience look at what you want them to, and I think people, of course, can. I think every filmmaker has their critics, and I really have loved what James Wan has done. Like I'm not a crazy fan of Furious 7, right? Like we'll get and Aquaman's like kind of whatever, but like in the horror space, like I actually just got the Scream Factory Dead Silence release, and I threw that guy in and I watched it immediately because I was like, you know what, like this, I had like the most garbage DVD copy of this, and I know I love this movie. And watching it again, you're like, wow, like this guy really set the tone. That was, I think, 2007. So like way before that kind of horror. And it's like, he did it again with Insidious. It was like almost like a second go around. And I think that it's kind of like a Scream 4 thing where it's like, this is the time, right? Like it was a little too early then. And it took a couple years later to really hit. And it's like that guy invented what I would say the next decade. And I actually was going to make a whole like video at one point in time about like why I think it is one of the most important horror movies, because I genuinely believe, and I know a lot of people say Paranormal Activity, but I think Paranormal Activity hit off on its own thing, and it was kind of its own. Obviously, yes, it gave Blumhouse a ton of money, and Jason Blum's able to do whatever. But I really do believe that if Insidious did not do well or just didn't exist, I don't know if horror would have had the resurgence it did, right? The Conjuring wouldn't have got made. You know, who knows if a ton of these other movies would ever have gotten made. And yeah, some are okay, some are really good. But I do wonder, and I do believe that it is an incredibly important movie. But yeah, after watching like Dead Silence, I'm like, oh, this guy's just he's amazing. I just love it all.
And I'll say this to anybody that's willing to listen. Dead Silence failed because it had the shittiest marketing you could ever hope to have for that movie. People went into that movie thinking they were going to get a possessed doll, you know, a ventriloquist doll. Like, hey, we've seen this in Goosebumps. We've seen a possessed doll in Chucky.
Right.
You know, and the movie is the farthest thing from a doll possession movie that you could possibly have. The dolls have such a minor part in that film, but it was marketed as a killer doll movie. And that's what killed that movie. I mean, it's just like Halloween 3. It's just like Jennifer's Body. It's just like Halloween Ends. You have these movies that don't stand a fucking chance when they're released because of the fact that the way that they're marketed is completely opposite of what you're getting in the film. Now, there's a difference between not showing you anything in the trailer and ruining the movie with the marketing. You know, I never seen Jennifer's Body because I just thought it was this weird teenage vampire drama, and it's a fucking awesome movie, man. Like, great film.
Oh, it is so good.
Yeah, same thing with Dead Silence, man. That movie scared the shit out of me. You know, Mary Shaw is a fantastic villain, and you wouldn't know anything about her from watching the trailer.
That is one of those movies too where I really think that is a movie I wish there was a sequel for, because I think it's such a good like recyclable plot too. Like it's got such a great like IP that you could just do anything with it. And I know like I remember reading I think Lee Wanell had like a blog for a long time where he had mentioned like there was a ton of studio interference and stuff, and you can feel it because it doesn't feel totally fleshed out, but it's like it nails the atmosphere and the tone and the eeriness and like just every little bit of it. Oh yeah, so I never saw that coming. Like, oh, that just blew my mind. And it's like, and now seeing it on the 4K release, it was just like, oh my god, like this is how this movie's supposed to look. Because I do remember it looking like kind of crunchy and like a little like compressed looking on like even I think the old Blu-ray, and the copy looks so good. And I'm like, oh man, like I hope this movie gets a new life, and I hope that like maybe studios look at the idea of, hey, we can make movies like this, or we could make a sequel to this. Like it's such a good just thing for it.
And it was left open-ended. So you could definitely do a sequel to it for sure. So man, I've had an amazing time talking to you about some of your favorite horror movies and your first horror movie. But before I let you go, Cam, we always bounce back to the same question. We're going to bounce back to Friday the 13th. And what we're going to do here is rank this movie on a skull count. Now, we're not ranking Friday the 13th on acting, production, score, direction, nothing like that. We're not being critics. What we're doing here is strictly ranking Friday the 13th on how much it affected you on your first viewing. So 0 skulls being not effective, 5 being extremely effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. What would your ranking of the OG Friday the 13th be?
I mean, it's got to be 5 out of 5. There's no way it can't be. I think it was definitely the most impactful moment. And like I said, even it just being one of my first memories, I think that it being such a heavyweight like that, and of course it being such a great movie and all those things combined, I think there's no way it couldn't be. And I think to this day, it's still, it's still always one of the first memories I have. So it'll always be there.
Well, and you talked about earlier, we talked about the amazing jump scare in Insidious. Look at the ending of this film, and you talk about the brilliance in the writing. The violins are swelling, the police are there, so everything's safe now because the police have showed up. And then you get little boy Jason jumping out of the lake and grabbing Adrian King and taking her back in. Like, beautiful writing. Beautiful writing. The storytelling is there. It's playing the music. The cops have showed up. Everything is fine now. We have happy music. We have the law enforcement here. We have nothing else to worry about. And then boom. So I know I said this at the beginning, guys, but we are at the end of the third act and the credits are about to roll. The curtain's about to drop. But before that happens, I have all of Cam's social media links down in the description. So make sure you're following him to stay up to date on all the things that he has coming up for you in the future. Cam, please don't go anywhere. I got a couple more questions for you. Everybody else, if you haven't already, please make sure you like and subscribe. It really does help the channel out more than you know. And until next time, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.